Engineer Kim Taeman felt his stomach drop as the transport shuttle touched down on Nexus Prime. The metallic surface beneath his feet hummed with alien technology he couldn't even begin to understand. His old toolkit felt heavier than usual. On his shoulder, a collection of wrenches, screwdrivers, and diagnostic tools that suddenly seemed primitive compared to the glowing structures around him. The Galactic Engineering Consortium's headquarters stretched into the purple sky like a crystal mountain. Taeman had never imagined he would see this place, let alone be invited here. Humans had only been part of the galactic community for 15 years, and most alien species still treated them like curious children who had just learned to walk. As he entered the main assembly hall, the weight of 1,000 alien eyes fell upon him. The crystalline beings from Altair were the first to react. Their bodies resonated with sharp, discordant tones that his universal translator helpfully informed him meant extreme doubt and "this is foolish." Their crystalline forms shifted colors from blue to an angry orange-red, making the entire room feel like it was filled with living gemstones that disapproved of his presence. The Valerian scholars floated in their containment suits, their gaseous forms swirling with what Taeman had learned meant agitation. Behind them, the machine intelligences from Proxima stood motionless, their optical sensors tracking his every movement with mechanical precision. Even the slug-like Andromedans seemed to be secreting extra slime, which apparently happened when they were nervous or annoyed. The problem they faced was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before. The void gates, massive structures that folded space-time to allow instant travel between star systems, were dying. Not just one or two, but dozens of them across 3 entire sectors of the galaxy. These weren't small gates either. Some were the size of small moons, ancient constructions that had been working perfectly for thousands of years. The failures had started 6 months ago in the Outer Rim territories. At first it seemed like routine maintenance issues. A gate would flicker, show some power fluctuations, then return to normal. But then the fluctuations became longer. Gates that had been stable for millennia began shutting down for hours, then days. Ships carrying vital supplies found themselves stranded in empty space, forced to use conventional engines that would take years to reach their destinations. The economic impact was staggering. Trade routes that had existed for centuries were collapsing. Entire colonies depended on regular supply shipments that could no longer get through. The Centauri Medical Alliance couldn't transport their healing crystals to the outer worlds. The agricultural collective of Vega couldn't ship food to the industrial planets that had no farmland. Millions of beings faced starvation, medical crises, and economic collapse. The Valerian scholars had thrown their best minds at the problem. These beings lived for 3,000 years and spent their entire existence studying quantum mechanics and space-time manipulation. They had examined every failing gate, run complex calculations that would have taken human computers centuries to complete, and reached a terrifying conclusion. The quantum matrices that powered the gates were experiencing cascade failures that couldn't be stopped or reversed. The machine intelligences from Proxima had been even more thorough. They had run 847 million different simulations, modeling every possible repair scenario they could imagine. Their quantum processors had worked non-stop for 4 months, exploring solutions that biological minds couldn't even comprehend. Every single simulation ended the same way: total system failure within 2 years. Other species had tried their own approaches. The architects of Kepler-9, beings made of living silicon who could manipulate matter at the molecular level, had attempted to rebuild the gate's quantum cores from scratch. They failed. The energy beings from the Orion Nebula had tried to stabilize the gates using pure consciousness merged with quantum fields. They also failed. As Taemin walked through the assembly hall, he saw the greatest minds in the galaxy looking defeated. These were beings who had built wonders that humans could barely imagine. They had created artificial suns, moved entire planets, and built structures that stretched across solar systems. If they couldn't solve this problem, what hope did one human engineer have? The holographic displays around the room showed the devastating data in glowing detail. Quantum field equations filled entire walls, their complexity making Taemin's head spin. Energy readings fluctuated in patterns that seemed almost alive, as if the gates themselves were in pain. Probability matrices showed the cascading failures spreading like a disease through the quantum substrate that connected all the gates. Taemin pulled out his battered tablet, a simple device that looked ancient compared to the floating crystalline computers the aliens used. He began taking notes, occasionally asking for clarification on the more complex readings. The aliens answered his questions with barely concealed impatience, clearly thinking this was a waste of their time. 3 hours passed. The great minds of the galaxy continued their debates, their arguments growing more heated as their frustration mounted. The crystalline beings' harmonics became increasingly discordant. The Valerians' gaseous forms swirled faster in their containment suits. Even the normally calm machine intelligences began displaying error messages in their optical displays. Then, Taemin stood up. The simple movement caught everyone's attention, mainly because he looked so small and ordinary compared to the magnificent alien beings around him. His toolkit clinked softly as he adjusted it on his shoulder. He looked around the room, meeting the optical sensors, crystalline matrices, and various alien sensory organs that served as eyes. "I can fix this," he said in Korean. His words automatically translated into dozens of alien languages simultaneously. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The crystalline beings erupted in harmonic laughter that sounded like wind chimes in a hurricane. The Valerians' gaseous forms practically exploded with mirth inside their containment suits. The machine intelligence's optical displays flashed with what could only be described as digital amusement. Even the slug-like Andromedans began vibrating with what passed for laughter among their species. The sound filled the massive assembly hall, a cacophony of alien amusement that would have been terrifying if it hadn't been so obviously dismissive. Here was a human, a member of a species barely out of their home solar system, claiming he could solve a problem that had stumped the galaxy's greatest minds for months. But Taemin just stood there calmly, waiting for the laughter to die down, his weathered hands steady on his simple toolkit. The next morning, while the galaxy's most brilliant minds continued their heated debates about quantum field manipulation and exotic matter synthesis, Taemin walked down to the consortium's storage levels with a simple requisition list. The Valerian scholars were still arguing about dimensional phase variance in Conference Room Alpha. The machine intelligences from Proxima had been running calculations non-stop for 18 hours straight, their processors glowing so hot they needed additional cooling systems, but Taemin wasn't interested in any of that. He was looking for what the advanced alien civilizations considered garbage. The storage supervisor, a floating jellyfish-like creature from the Tau Ceti system, looked at Taemin's list with obvious confusion. Its translucent body pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that roughly translated to, "Are you serious right now? You want scrap metal?" the supervisor asked, its voice bubbling through the universal translator. "We have quantum-stable alloys that can withstand the heat of a star. We have programmable matter that can reshape itself at the molecular level. We have crystalline matrices that can store the knowledge of entire civilizations. And you want scrap metal?" Taemin nodded. "The rustier, the better." An hour later, Park So-young arrived from Earth on the emergency transport shuttle that had been arranged after Taemin's bold claim the day before. She was a compact woman with calloused hands and motor oil permanently embedded under her fingernails. Her toolkit was even more battered than Taemin's, held together with what appeared to be actual duct tape. "So," she said, looking around at the gleaming alien technology surrounding them, "we're really going to fix the most advanced transportation system in the galaxy with a hammer and some spare parts?" "That's the plan," Taemin replied, hefting a piece of corroded metal that had once been part of a Martian mining ship. "Remember when we fixed the Sol subway system after the quantum cascade failure?" So-young grinned. "The one where all the alien consultants said it was impossible to repair without completely rebuilding the quantum tunneling array. And we fixed it by hitting the main relay with a rubber mallet and rewiring the control system with spare parts from a food truck." "Good times," So-young said, pulling on her work gloves. "What are we building?" What they built over the next 3 days looked like nothing the galaxy had ever seen in an engineering context. It started with a heavy steel base that Taemin had salvaged from an old cargo container. On top of that, they mounted what could best be described as a massive tuning fork, but one made from a curious mixture of earth steel and alien alloys that they had carefully selected from the scrap heap. The aliens watched from behind protective barriers, partly for safety and partly because they couldn't stand to look at what the humans were doing. The crystalline beings from Altair vibrated at frequencies that indicated physical pain every time Taemin used his welding torch. The machine intelligences kept trying to calculate the structural integrity of the device and getting error messages because their programs couldn't accept that something so crude could actually hold together. The most vocal critic was Dr. Vexhari, the lead physicist from Centauri Prime. Its species looked like a cross between an octopus and a peacock, with tentacles that could manipulate matter at the quantum level and feathers that displayed complex mathematical equations in shifting colors. Dr. Vexhari had spent 800 years perfecting the art of elegant engineering, where every component was a masterpiece of efficiency and beauty. "This is barbaric," Dr. Vexhari declared, its tentacles writhing with disgust as So Young hammered a bent piece of metal back into shape. "Your species approaches engineering like primitive blacksmiths. Where is the quantum harmony? Where is the mathematical beauty? Where is the elegant integration of form and function?" So Young paused in her hammering, wiped sweat from her forehead, and looked up at the alien physicist. Her face was smudged with grease and her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail that had come half undone. "You know what your problem is?" she said, pointing her hammer at Dr. Vexhari. "You've forgotten that the point of engineering isn't to make something pretty. It's to make something that works." The alien's feathers displayed rapidly shifting equations that the translator couldn't keep up with, but the tone was clearly indignant. "Crude functionality is not engineering, it is effective?" Taemin suggested, not looking up from where he was carefully calibrating the angle of the tuning fork's tines. "We call it engineering," So Young added with a smile that was equal parts friendly and challenging. "You might want to take notes." The device they were building defied every principle that the galaxy had developed over millions of years of technological advancement. It was loud where alien technology was silent, mechanical where theirs was quantum, and simple where theirs was elegantly complex. When the tuning fork resonated, it made a sound that could be heard 3 levels away, a deep, thrumming note that seemed to shake the very foundations of the station. The alien observers flinched every time they tested it. The Valerian scholars had to increase the density of their containment suits because the vibrations were disrupting their gaseous forms. The machine intelligences complained that the acoustic interference was affecting their processing efficiency. "It's so primitive," whispered one of the Andromedan engineers to its colleague. "They're using actual moving parts, physical components that touch each other and create friction and wear. Don't they understand that such crude mechanisms are inherently unreliable?" But as the humans worked, something interesting began to happen. Other engineers from various species started gathering around to watch, despite their colleagues' obvious disapproval. There was something mesmerizing about watching beings who built with their hands, who solved problems through trial and error rather than complex calculations. A young Kepler engineer, its silicon-based form still learning to manipulate matter at the molecular level, asked quietly, "Why do you use such direct methods?" Taemin looked up from where he was adjusting a connection with what appeared to be a standard wrench, a tool that most of the galaxy hadn't used in millennia. "Because sometimes," he said, "the simplest solution is the right solution. Your people build machines that think. We build machines that work." On the 3rd day, they finished their device. It stood about 3 meters tall, hummed with mechanical energy, and looked like it had been assembled in someone's garage rather than the most advanced engineering facility in the galaxy. The tuning fork could be adjusted to different frequencies. The striking mechanism could be timed to microsecond precision, and the whole thing could be operated by someone with basic mechanical knowledge. It was, by any measure, of galactic engineering, Standards absolutely ridiculous. It was also exactly what Timon knew they needed. Ready for field testing? So Young asked, her hands already reaching for her toolkit. Timon nodded, ignoring the aliens who were still muttering about primitive methods and crude functionality. Let's go fix some void gates. The journey to the Kepler system took 2 days, aboard the consortium's fastest research vessel. Timon spent most of the trip double-checking his calculations, while So Young made final adjustments to their device, which they had carefully secured in the ship's cargo bay. The alien crew members gave the contraption a wide berth, as if it might explode at any moment. Dr. Lee Min-ho had joined them from the Lunar Research Station, bringing with him a collection of human-designed monitoring equipment that looked primitive, compared to the ship's crystalline sensors, but had one crucial advantage. They were designed to measure things that actually moved and made noise, rather than the silent quantum fluctuations that alien technology preferred. Engineer Choi Hee-jin arrived from the Mars orbital platform just before departure. She was a specialist in large-scale mechanical systems, the kind of person who could listen to a massive industrial machine and tell you exactly which bearing was about to fail, just from the sound it made. The aliens found this ability somewhere, between mystifying and disturbing. As their ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system, the scale of the crisis became immediately apparent. The void gate hung in space like a dying giant, a massive ring structure 50 kilometers in diameter, its surface covered with the geometric patterns that channeled quantum energy across impossible distances. But instead of the steady blue glow that should have indicated normal operation, the gate flickered with sickly yellow and orange pulses, like a candle guttering in the wind. Surrounding the gate at what the aliens considered a safe distance, roughly 10,000 kilometers, was the largest collection of ships Timon had ever seen. The Valerian research fleet floated in perfect formation, their crystalline hulls reflecting the gate's unstable light. The machine intelligences from Proxima had sent their geometric vessels, all sharp angles and mathematical precision. Even the normally reclusive energy beings from the Orion Nebula had manifested physical forms to observe the proceedings. Estimated observer count is at 47,000 vessels, reported the ship's navigation AI in its perfectly modulated voice. All are maintaining minimum safe distance per galactic engineering protocols. Minimum safe distance for what? So Young asked, looking out at the massive gate structure. For when the quantum matrix experiences final cascade failure, the AI replied helpfully. Current projections indicate total structural collapse within 72 hours. Timon studied the readouts that Min-ho was gathering from their human-built sensors. The gate's problems were actually worse than the official reports had indicated. The quantum field that held the structure together was fluctuating wildly, creating stress patterns that were literally tearing the gate apart at the molecular level. Look at this, Min-ho said, pointing to a display that showed the gate's energy patterns as a series of jagged lines. It's like the quantum matrix is fighting itself. Every time one section tries to stabilize, it throws another section out of alignment. Hee-jin nodded, studying the readings with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades troubleshooting complex systems. It's a resonance cascade. I've seen this in large-scale industrial equipment. When the harmonic frequencies get out of sync, the system starts tearing itself apart. Can we fix it? Timon asked. With what we brought? Hee-jin smiled. Oh yes. This is exactly the kind of problem our little hammer was designed for. The next few hours were spent in careful preparation. Their device, which Timon had officially designated as a harmonic realignment tool in his reports, though everyone on the team called it the hammer, had to be precisely positioned relative to the gate's quantum core. This meant getting much closer to the unstable structure than any of the alien observers were comfortable with. The humans are approaching to within 500 kilometers of the gate, announced one of the Valerian research vessels over the open communication channel. This is unprecedented. No vessel has approached that close since the instabilities began. Their ship will be destroyed when the gate collapses, added a machine intelligence from Proxima, its mechanical voice betraying what might have been concern. They should maintain safe distance. But Timon's team pressed on. They needed to, Attach their device directly to the gate's outer housing, where it could deliver precisely timed mechanical impulses to the quantum core within. It was delicate work that required them to match the gate's rotation and navigate through the chaotic energy fields that were leaking from the failing structure. Attachment complete, So Young reported from the ship's external work bay. The hammer is in position and calibrated to the gate's primary resonance frequency. Through the ship's viewports, they could see their device mounted on the gate's surface, a crude-looking mechanical contraption that seemed absurdly small against the vast alien structure. To the thousands of observers watching from their safe distances, it must have looked like someone trying to repair a starship with a Stone Age tool. Minho ran final checks on all his monitoring equipment. All sensors active. I'm reading the gate's quantum matrix, harmonic frequencies, structural, stress patterns, and energy distribution. Everything looks ready. Heejin took her position at the device's control console. Harmonic realignment tool powered up and ready for activation. All systems showing green. Taemin looked around at his team, then at the massive alien structure that surrounded them. Somewhere behind them, 47,000 alien vessels waited to see if humanity's crude approach to engineering could accomplish what the galaxy's greatest minds had declared impossible. All stations report ready, he announced over the communication channel, knowing that every alien observer could hear him. Beginning harmonic realignment procedure in 10 seconds. The silence that followed was profound. Across the entire fleet of observer vessels, millions of alien beings watched and waited. Some expected spectacular failure, others hoped against hope that the humans might actually succeed. All of them were about to witness something that would change their understanding of engineering forever. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Activating harmonic realignment tool. Hyojin pressed the activation button. The mechanical striker engaged with a sound that defied the vacuum of space, a deep, resonant clang that somehow transmitted through the gate's structure and into every ship in the area. It was the sound of metal striking metal, of physical force being applied to solve a quantum problem, of human engineering in its purest form. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The sickly yellow flickering that had plagued the gate for months suddenly stopped. The chaotic energy patterns that had been tearing the structure apart smoothed into steady, harmonious waves. The quantum matrix that alien scientists had declared irreparably damaged began operating with a stability that made every sensor in the system recalibrate itself. But that wasn't all. As the gate's systems came back online, the energy readings began climbing. Not just to normal operational levels, but beyond them. The gate was running at 147% efficiency, something that every alien physicist in the area had mathematically proven was impossible. This cannot be correct, transmitted the lead Valerian researcher. Our instruments must be malfunctioning. Negative, replied a machine intelligence. All sensor arrays confirm the readings. The gate is operating beyond theoretical maximum efficiency. For the first time in galactic history, a technology that had worked the same way for thousands of years was suddenly working better than it ever had before, and it had been fixed with what was essentially a very sophisticated hammer. The silence that followed lasted for nearly a full minute, an eternity in a universe where information traveled at the speed of light. Then, slowly, the first messages began to arrive from the observer fleet. How did you do this? What is your method? Can you teach us? Taemin smiled as he looked out at the gate, now glowing with steady blue light that indicated perfect health. Sometimes, he said over the open channel, the best engineering isn't about making things more complicated. Sometimes it's about knowing exactly where to hit something to make it work properly. The hammer had spoken, and the galaxy was listening. Within hours of the Kepler gate repair, every major news network across the galaxy was broadcasting the same impossible story. The Zentorian information grid led with primitive species achieves impossible engineering feat. The Valerian consciousness stream simply displayed the raw sensor data, letting their viewers experience the shock directly through shared mental connections. Even the machine intelligences of Proxima, who rarely communicated with biological species, sent formal data packets confirming the results to every civilized world. But it wasn't just news that spread across the galaxy. It was desperate hope. Engineer Nam Jiwoo was still recovering from the exhaustion of the Kepler mission when her communication device started chiming with incoming messages. The first was from the Silicon Confederacy, a group of mineral-based life forms who had built their civilization inside the cores of dead planets. Their message was brief and to the point. Our primary fusion cores are failing. Traditional repair. Methods ineffective. Request immediate human consultation. Jiwoo had barely finished reading that message when another arrived from the Andromedan Climate Authority. Atmospheric processors offline on 17 colony worlds. Millions of lives at risk. Will pay any price for human engineering assistance. Then came messages from the crystal cities of Vega, the floating continents of Alpha Centauri, the machine worlds of the Outer Rim, and dozens of other civilizations. Each one described problems that their best engineers had declared impossible to solve. Each one was begging for help from the humans who had done the impossible. The human engineering community, which consisted of exactly 12 qualified interstellar engineers, suddenly found themselves the most sought-after beings in the galaxy. Jiwoo's first assignment took her to the heart of the Silicon Confederacy, deep within the molten core of a planet-sized forge world. The silicon beings who lived there existed at temperatures that would vaporize most organic life, their bodies flowing like living lava through crystalline passages carved into the planet's interior. The problem, explained Chief Engineer Pyrextal, its voice coming through thermal translators that glowed white-hot, is that our fusion cores have become too efficient. They are producing energy beyond our containment system's capacity, but we cannot reduce their output without causing total shutdown. Jiwoo studied the massive fusion reactors, each one the size of a city building, their surfaces glowing brighter than the surface of a star. The silicon beings had designed them to be perfect, mathematically optimized systems that operated with flawless precision. But that perfection had become a trap. The reactors couldn't adapt to changing conditions, couldn't adjust their output, couldn't handle the small variations that naturally occurred in any complex system. You need controlled instability, Jiwoo told them, pulling out her toolkit. Your reactors are too stable. They need to be able to fluctuate, to respond to changes instead of fighting them. What she did next horrified the silicon engineers. Using a device that looked suspiciously like a modified impact wrench, she began introducing tiny mechanical vibrations into the reactor's magnetic containment field. Not random vibrations. Carefully calculated ones that would force the system to constantly make small adjustments to maintain stability. You are introducing chaos into our perfect system, Pyrextal protested, its molten form rippling with distress. I'm introducing flexibility, Jiwoo corrected. Perfect systems are brittle. They break when conditions change. Systems that can adapt, survive everything. The results were immediate. The reactors began operating at variable output levels, automatically, adjusting to demand instead of running at maximum efficiency regardless of need. Not only did this solve the containment problem, but it also improved their overall efficiency by 30%. Meanwhile, Park Dong-hyun was having his own adventure on the other side of the galaxy. The Andromedan colonies were suffocating as their atmospheric processors, massive machines that converted raw planetary atmospheres into breathable air, had begun shutting down one by one. The Andromedan engineers, slug-like beings who secreted complex biochemical solutions, had tried every conventional repair method. They had replaced worn components, recalibrated quantum matrices, and even attempted to rebuild entire systems from scratch. Nothing worked. The processors would run for a few hours, then shut down again. Dong-hyun arrived on the colony world of New Andromeda to find millions of beings living in sealed emergency shelters, slowly running out of breathable air. The largest atmospheric processor, a structure that stretched for kilometers across the planet's surface, sat silent and dead despite showing no obvious damage. The problem, explained Chief Engineer Sluxmarn, its translator barely keeping up, with the rapid biochemical changes in its slime secretions, is that the intake filters have become too clean. The processors require a certain level of atmospheric contaminants to function properly, but our maintenance protocols have eliminated those contaminants. Dong Hyun stared at the engineer for a long moment. You're telling me that your air cleaners stopped working because the air became too clean? Precisely. Without sufficient particulate matter to process, the systems cannot maintain proper chemical balance. The solution was elegantly simple and completely insane by alien standards. Dong Hyun used controlled explosive charges to blast carefully, measured amounts of dust and debris into the processor's intake systems. It was the engineering equivalent of deliberately making something dirty so it would work properly. The Andromedan engineers watched in horror as he set off small explosions throughout their pristine facility. But within hours, all 17 atmospheric processors were running perfectly, automatically maintaining the precise level of contamination needed for optimal operation. Dr. Song Yoonji faced perhaps the most challenging assignment of all. The crystal cities of Vega were architectural marvels, entire civilizations built inside massive crystalline structures that floated through space. These city ships housed billions of beings and had operated flawlessly for millennia. But now they were developing stress fractures that threatened to shatter the entire structures. The Vegan architects, beings who could manipulate crystal matrices at the molecular level, had calculated that any attempt to repair the fractures would cause catastrophic resonance cascades that would destroy the cities completely. Their mathematics were perfect, their simulations flawless, and their conclusions absolute. The cities were doomed. Yoonji looked at their calculations for exactly 10 minutes before announcing her solution. You're going to create controlled fractures in precise locations to redistribute the stress patterns. That will destroy everything, protested Master Architect Crispin, its crystalline body flashing with patterns of pure terror. No, Yoonji said calmly. It will save everything. Sometimes you have to break something a little bit to keep it from breaking completely. Using resonance generators that produced vibrations at frequencies the architects considered destructive, she created hundreds of tiny, precisely placed cracks throughout the city structures. Each crack was designed to absorb and redirect stress, turning the rigid crystalline matrix into a flexible network that could bend without breaking. The result was cities that were not only repaired but fundamentally improved. The new stress distribution patterns made them stronger and more resilient than they had ever been before. Word of these successes spread even faster than the original Void Gate repair. Across the galaxy, alien civilizations began to realize that their approach to engineering, seeking perfection, eliminating variables, creating rigid systems, had fundamental flaws that only humans seemed to understand how to fix. The requests kept coming. Human engineers found themselves traveling to worlds they had never heard of, solving problems that alien minds couldn't comprehend, using methods that defied conventional wisdom. Each success reinforced the same pattern, where aliens saw impossible complexity requiring perfect solutions. Humans saw mechanical problems that needed practical fixes. The galaxy began to whisper about the strange species that could make anything work, not through superior technology or mathematical perfection, but through an intuitive understanding that the best systems weren't the most elegant ones. They were the ones that actually worked when everything went wrong. And in a universe where everything eventually went wrong, that was the most valuable skill of all. 6 months after the Kepler Gate incident, the Galactic Engineering Consortium held an emergency session that would change the course of galactic civilization forever. Representatives from over 200 species gathered in the Great Assembly Hall on Nexus Prime. But this time the atmosphere was completely different from Taemin's first visit. Where once there had been skeptical chittering and dismissive harmonic vibrations, now there was respectful silence as the consortium's governing council announced their decision. The crystalline beings from Altair, who had once mocked human engineering methods, now resonated with tones of deep respect. The machine intelligences from Proxima had updated their databases to include an entirely new category of problem-solving protocols labeled human-style applied engineering. The motion passes unanimously, announced Councillor Vexithera, the ancient Centaurian whose species had founded the consortium over 3,000 years ago. Kim Tae-min of Earth is hereby appointed as the first Director of Applied Human Engineering. with full authority to establish new training protocols and research initiatives. Taman stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of alien faces, sensors and various sensory organs that served as eyes for the galaxy's greatest minds. His acceptance speech was characteristically brief. "Thank you. Now let's get to work." The real work began immediately. The consortium's leadership had recognized something that the galaxy's engineers were still struggling to understand. Human engineering wasn't just different, it was revolutionary. While alien civilizations had spent millennia perfecting elegant, mathematically precise solutions to complex problems, humans had developed something entirely different. They had learned to work with imperfection, to embrace chaos, and to find practical solutions that actually functioned in the messy, unpredictable, real universe. Professor Yoon arrived from Earth's Seoul National University just 2 weeks later, bringing with her a cargo ship full of what she called educational materials, tools, spare parts, broken machines, and various mechanical devices that alien customs officers had trouble classifying. Her mission was to establish the Academy of Practical Solutions, the first educational institution in galactic history, dedicated to teaching aliens how to think like human engineers. The Academy's first building was constructed in record time. Using a revolutionary new technique that horrified alien architects, the humans built it while they designed it. Instead of spending years creating perfect blueprints and running complex structural simulations, they started with a basic framework and modified it as they went along, adapting to problems as they arose and improving the design based on practical experience. "This is madness," observed a Kepler 9 architect as it watched human construction workers modify a support beam using nothing more than a cutting torch and some creative welding. "How can you build something without knowing exactly what it will look like when finished?" Yoon, who was directing the construction while simultaneously designing the Academy's curriculum, looked up from her tablet and smiled. "We do know what it will look like when finished. It will look like something that works. The exact details will depend on what problems we encounter while building it." The Academy's first semester drew students from 47 different species, all eager to learn the mysterious human approach to engineering. The curriculum was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of starting with mathematical theory and elegant principles, students began with what Daun called Introduction to Breaking Things Properly. "The first rule of human engineering," she explained to her diverse class of crystalline beings, gaseous entities, silicon-based life forms, and machine intelligences, "is that everything breaks. Not sometimes, not occasionally. Everything, always, eventually breaks. The question isn't how to prevent things from breaking. The question is how to build things that still work even when they're partially broken." Her first assignment shocked the alien students. They were given perfectly functioning devices and told to break them in creative ways, then figure out how to make them work again using whatever materials they could find. The Valerian scholars, who had spent centuries perfecting their understanding of quantum mechanics, found themselves trying to repair a simple mechanical clock using nothing but duct tape and determination. Engineer Lim Seung-ho's inaugural lecture became legendary throughout the galaxy. The main auditorium was packed beyond capacity, with representatives from civilizations that had never spoken to each other sitting side by side, united by their desire to understand human engineering principles. Seung-ho walked onto the stage, carrying a toolbox that looked like it had survived several explosions, a construction accident, and possibly a small war. He set it down on the podium with a metallic clang that echoed through the silent auditorium. "The universe," he began, "is not a precision instrument. It's not a perfectly calibrated machine operating according to elegant mathematical principles. The universe is messy, chaotic, and held together with the equivalent of duct tape, determination, and the occasional well-placed kick." The alien audience stirred uneasily. These concepts challenged fundamental assumptions that their civilizations had held for millennia. "Your civilizations have spent thousands of years trying to create perfect solutions to complex problems," Seung-ho continued. "You build systems that work flawlessly under ideal conditions. But the universe doesn't provide ideal conditions. It provides broken equipment, missing parts, power failures, unexpected variables, and Murphy's Law, which states that anything that can go wrong will go wrong, usually at the worst possible moment. He opened his toolbox and pulled out what appeared to be a hammer that had been modified with additional components of unknown purpose. Human engineering isn't about fighting that chaos. It's about learning to dance with it. We build systems that expect things to go wrong. We design solutions that work even when half the components are missing. We create machines that can be repaired by someone with basic tools and common sense, not just by highly trained specialists with perfect equipment. The lecture continued for 3 hours, with Xiong-Ho demonstrating principles that the aliens had never considered. He showed them how to use controlled randomness to solve optimization problems, how to make systems more reliable by making them less precise, and how sometimes the best solution to a complex problem was to hit it with exactly the right tool in exactly the right place. The impact was immediate and profound. Within weeks, engineering schools across the galaxy were adding courses in adaptive problem-solving and constructive chaos theory. The machine intelligences of Proxima began incorporating random variables into their previously perfect calculations. The crystalline beings of Altair started building flexibility into their rigid harmonic structures. But perhaps the most significant change occurred in the consortium's workshops themselves. Taemin's new office overlooked the main engineering bays, and the transformation was remarkable. Where once there had been pristine laboratories filled with silent, elegant alien technology, now there were workshops that buzzed with activity. The sound of hammering mixed with the hum of quantum processors. Welding sparks flew alongside holographic projections. Alien engineers worked alongside human mechanics, learning to solve problems with their hands as well as their minds. The Zentorian, physicist Dr. Vex Hari, who had once criticized human methods as barbaric, could be seen carefully practicing with a basic toolkit, trying to master what the humans called percussive maintenance. The Valerian scholars had started incorporating mechanical components into their quantum calculations. Even the energy beings from the Orion Nebula had begun manifesting physical forms so they could experience the tactile satisfaction of fixing something with actual tools. As Taemin stood in his office one evening, watching the sunset reflect, off the workshop windows below, he reflected on how much had changed. The galaxy had learned humanity's greatest lesson, that perfection wasn't the goal of good engineering. Functionality was, that elegant solutions were less important than solutions that actually worked. That sometimes the most sophisticated approach to a problem was knowing exactly where to apply percussive maintenance. The communication device on his desk chimed with another request for assistance. This one was from a previously unknown civilization in the Outer Rim territories, describing a problem that their greatest minds had declared impossible to solve. Taemin smiled as he reached for his toolkit. In the distance, the stars themselves seemed to hum with a newfound mechanical harmony, the sound of a galaxy learning that sometimes the best way to fix something was to understand it well enough, to know exactly where to hit it. The age of perfect engineering was over. The age of practical engineering had begun. And across the galaxy, things that had been broken for millennia were finally starting to work again.